I don't want you to die. Minhu sighed and let go of Chantel's hands. Chantel, let me do this. Chantel still refused. I don't want. Look at me, Chantel. Minhu said, cutting her off. I will protect you. I will fight your battles, and if need be, I will lay down my life for you, Minhu confessed. Chantel stared at him in surprise. Why would you do all of this? Because I love you, Minhu replied. What? Minhu nodded. Yes, Chantel, I know it sounds crazy, and there's so much going on, but I can't help the way I feel. I'm crazy about you. The last time I saw you injured and almost dead, my heart was in tumult. I felt an indescribable pain. I cannot see you in danger, Chantel. I cannot bear to see you injured. Do you understand what I'm saying? Chantel stared at Minhu as he expressed his feelings. Her eyes held complex emotions, and it scared Minhu. Why are you suddenly quiet? He asked. Chantel still kept silent while staring at Minhu. Come on, Chantel, please say something, Minhu pleaded. Chantel lifted her hands and held Minhu's cheeks. Surprised by her reaction, his heart began to race, and he was about to speak when she crashed her lips against his. Minhu pulled away and stared at Chantel, surprise evident in his eyes. She smiled at him, and her lips parted in invitation. His heart was thumping, and he had a lot to ask, but the words couldn't leave his mouth. Chantel moved closer, placing her hands around his neck. His eyes held hers briefly before he kissed her deeply, pouring all his emotions into that moment. Relief that she was alive, fear for what lay ahead, and the love he'd finally confessed. The kiss deepened, and time seemed to stand still as they held each other, finally acknowledging the feelings that had grown between them through all the danger and chaos. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Minhu rested his forehead against hers. Chantel, he whispered. I know, she replied softly. I feel it too, Minhu. I think I have for a while now. They held each other for a long moment before Chantel pulled back slightly, her expression becoming serious. But Minhu, let me go to see Yusuk, all right? Help me. I made the mistake of working alone, and I almost lost my life. Let's work together. I can't do this without your help. Minhu sighed, stroking her hair gently. All right. What do you have in mind? Hearing his question, Chantel smiled and instantly got up. She stood in front of him and began to explain. All right, this is what I have in mind. She spent the next hour mapping out her plan and how to deal with all the unforeseen circumstances that may arise. As she kept talking and gesturing with her hands, Minhu stared at her in awe, marveling at how beautiful and brilliant she was. When she was done, she said, So, what do you think? Where do I come in? Minhu asked. Chantel thought for a moment and replied, How about a next-door neighbor? The next-door neighbor, well, that can work, Minhu said. But listen, Chantel, if we do this, you have to be very careful. You can't take unnecessary risks, and you have to listen to me. I won't take unnecessary risks, Chantel replied. Minhu smiled and sat up from the bed, pulling her closer to him, hugging her. Do you know that you're the most special person I've ever met, Chantel? He asked. Am I? Yes, you are, Minhu replied. She chuckled and said, Well, I guess in your own way, you're special too. Minhu smiled. Coming from you, it means a lot. The next day, at 8 p.m. sharp, Minhu and Chantel arrived at the Western Club, where arrangements had been made for her to meet with Yusuk while disguising herself as a companion. Minhu was uncomfortable with what she wore and jealous too. The skirt was really very short. Even Chantel wasn't comfortable in it. Her top was a crop top exposing her flat belly, and she had a lot of makeup on her face as she looked really seductive, alluring, and beautiful. She wore fishnets under the short skirt she was wearing. Her look was enough to drive any man wild, and the fact that Yusuk was going to get a view of her looking that way made Minhu upset. If I have my chance, I'll take him out, he said to Chantel. She laughed and asked, Now who is threatening to jeopardize the mission? I'm not jeopardizing anything, Minhu replied. I'm just saying he shouldn't try any rubbish. All right, as you wish, boss, Chantel said. Once they got to the entrance, Chantel added, Remember, I don't know you, neither do you know me. You can get going now, it's almost 8. Minhoo agreed, and she began making her way into the club while Minhoo waited outside. He had disguised his appearance so he would look like a much older man so that no wolves would be able to recognize him. He knew that they wouldn't recognize Chantel because she looked completely different. Even he would have found it difficult to recognize her if he had seen her somewhere else. When he walked into the club, he sat down at a different table, ordered a glass of drink, and waited while his eyes kept going over to where Chantel was. With the help of Blake, he had been able to secure a room that was directly beside the one Yoosuk used. The plan was that once Chantel was inside the room with Yoosuk, she would attack him, make him very weak, put a knife to his throat, and extract as much information as she could from him, especially about the safe house where her parents were being kept. Once she did that, she would render him unconscious. She and Minhoo would then go out through the balcony of their respective rooms. Minhoo would help her get into his own side, and they would enter his room. She would disguise herself by putting on a different outfit, and they would sneak out of the club. Before Yuseok's men realized it, they'd be gone, leaving Busan as soon as possible. It seemed like a flawless plan, but she had a nagging feeling in her stomach that something would go wrong. Chantel went straight to the table where Yoosuk was sitting, with about 6 men standing behind him, 3 on each side. She knew he had more men than the ones she could see, and they were all armed. Perhaps he thought she would get scared if she saw too many. However, she focused on the task and smiled seductively at him as she took her seat. "Wow!" Yoosuk exclaimed when he saw her. Unable to contain his excitement, he began to drool. When Chantel saw the way he looked, she thought inwardly, "Wow, he looks like a pig. That picture must have been highly edited. He looks older too and comes across as a loser. Oh, Chantel, the things you need to do for your parents." She smiled when she saw that he was observing her intently. There were drinks on the table, but she didn't want to take a sip. She waited to see what he was going to do. However, Yoosuk kept drooling, and eventually he said, "Wow, you're so beautiful and hot, very young too. You're the best I've seen." "Thank you," Chantel replied, smiling. "You know what, since you've gotten me all excited, I don't want to wait anymore," Yoosuk said. He reached into his pocket, took out a powdered substance, and poured it into a glass cup for Chantel. Then he mixed the substance inside and filled the glass with soju. "Go ahead, drink it." Chantel stared at him in surprise and asked, "Excuse me?" He chuckled. "Well, it's just something to put you in the mood. It's a little body-friendly aphrodisiac. Trust me, you'll feel very good once you have a taste." The moment he pushed the glass over to her, Chantel smiled and said, "Mr. Yoosuk, I don't need it. I'm always in the mood. How else will I please a capable man like you?" Yoosuk frowned and threatened, "Drink it or you scram." Chantel hesitated. She knew she needed to be careful if she was going to extract information from him. How could she drink a substance she knew nothing about? However, Yoosuk said to one of his guys, "Who's this girl? Can they get me a more obedient companion? I hate the ones who try to act like they know better than me." He took out his phone and was about to make a phone call when Chantel said, "No, wait, hold on, Mr. Yoosuk. Drink it or get out," Yoosuk replied firmly. Unbeknownst to the men, Chantel had a Bluetooth device in her ear. Everything she said was heard by Minhoo, who could also see their movements. Minhoo warned, "Chantel, don't drink it. Get out of there right now. Listen, no matter what, we'll find another way, all right? We'll definitely find another way. Just trust me." Chantel stared at the man, who was looking at her, waiting to see what she'd do. Eventually, she forced herself to smile, picked up the glass of drink, and gulped it in one go. Minhoo watched in anger and frustration as Yoosuk got up and cupped Chantel's breast, feeling it through her light fabric. She smiled at Yoosuk as though it were the most natural thing to do while Minhoo balled his fists. Chantel was too stubborn for her own good. Fortunately, he had made a backup plan in preparation for unforeseen circumstances like this. He knew that if his plans were to succeed, This was the best time to move, however. He found it difficult to leave Chantel alone with Yusuk since she seemed completely out of it. In her state, she could neither defend herself nor understand what was happening around her. He had no idea about what was in the substance Yusuk gave to her, but the effects seemed to have kicked in pretty quickly, and it had gotten the pig all excited. Knowing that Chantel had a gun strapped to her thighs did not make him feel any better. Once Yusuk discovered it, she would be dead meat, but a man like him would want to eat his prey first, so in the end, Minhu had to force himself to leave. He quickly made his way to the room they had booked, which was directly beside Yusuk's. He picked up a bag, confirmed that everything he needed was inside, and went to the balcony. Taking out his binoculars, he surveyed the area to ensure that there were no enemies lurking around. Once he was convinced, he climbed over to Yusuk's balcony and worked on his lock. After successfully picking it, he got into the room. Placing his bag on the bed, he took out different ammunition and placed them in several parts of the room, where they would not be noticed. After doing this, he hung his bag and hid inside one of the curtains in the room. Yusuk held Chantel by the waist and led her into the room. Once they were inside, he locked the door and threw her on the bed. She happily got up and threw herself into his arms. "Oh, I love it when my whores are eager to please," he exclaimed. He pushed her back onto the bed, and she began to squirm. As though she regained her sanity for a while, she sat up and said, "Excuse me, do you happen to know Dong Hyun?" Yusuk's expression changed, and he stared at her in surprise. He suddenly gripped her neck and asked, "Who are you, bitch?" He pushed her onto the bed as she struggled to breathe and was about to punch her. However, from the back, he was kicked so hard on his balls. Numbed by pain, he fell on Chantel's body. "Get off of her, you pig," Minhu said, turning Yusuk over. He punched him in the face. It was so painful that Yusuk closed his eyes and blacked out for a while. Seeing Minhu, Chantel found him familiar. She got up and smiled. "Minhu." She threw herself into his arms. As he held her, Minhu shook his head, pinched her cheeks, and asked, "Why are you so stubborn? You never listen to me. Hold on, okay? I need to do something important." He helped her sit at the edge of the bed and went back to face Yusuk, who had now opened his eyes. Chantel got up, took off her skirt, and was about to take off her panties. The gun, which was strapped to her thigh, was now revealed, and when Minhu noticed what she was doing, he said, "No, Chantel." He covered Yusuk's eyes while the man struggled to fight with him. Minhu tore off a piece of the man's shirt and tied it around his eyes. Afterward, he pushed him off the bed and ran to Chantel to stop her. Yusuk, who could see faintly through the blindfold, got up and charged at Minhu, trying to punch him, but he missed because Minhu had already changed direction. Minhu once again kneed him in his balls, and when the man fell this time around, he pulled the blindfold off his eyes and reached out for his gun. Minhu was faster than him, however, and kicked him from the back, causing the man to fall on his face. When he realized that Minhu was no match for him, Yusuk began to scream, but Minhu covered his mouth. He bit Minhu's hand, and the latter let go of him, punching him again 3 more times until Yusuk blacked out a second time. After the man fainted, Minhu turned his attention to Chantel and noticed that she had taken off every piece of clothing on her body and was now stark naked. He quickly tied the man's eyes and mouth and ran over to her, saying, "Listen to me, Chantel. You need to put on your clothes. I know you're not fully in your right mind, but please do not forget why we're here." Chantel refused to listen to him and rather tried to unbutton his shirt. At this point, Minhu realized that the gun tied to her thigh was dangerous for her since she had no idea what she was doing. He took out the gun and placed it on the ground beside the bed. Afterward, he picked up the bedsheet, covered it around Chantel, and pushed her onto the bed, saying, "Lie down for a while," before turning his attention back to Yusuk. He stood in front of him, waiting for the man to open his eyes, but then Chantel took off the bedsheet and ran up to Minhu. She pulled him toward the bed and pushed him onto the bed. Minhu briefly stared at the unconscious Yusuk and was about to get up when Chantel got on his body and crashed her lips against his. Minhu felt blood rush to his head. He kissed her back before trying to push her away. "I want you, Minhu," she whispered excitedly. Minhu shook his head. "Later, darling. Right now I need to." Ignoring his words, Chantel kissed him again, but he pushed her off a second time. She went below, unzipped his pants, and held his dick. Minhu stared at her in surprise as she took his length in her mouth and began to suck it. He closed his eyes, moaning and gasping. However, his eyes flung open when he recalled why they were there. He looked in Yusiak's direction and noticed that the man who was lying on the floor had begun to move again. He knew they couldn't waste any more time, since it wasn't on their side. He stroked Chantel's hair and reluctantly pushed her off his body. He tried once again to convince her to stay still, but she was adamant. Leaving her on the bed, he went back to Yusuk and tried to zip in his dick, which had become erect. Seeing that Yusuk, whose hands were tied, was now struggling to free himself, Minhu freed his mouth and said, "Tell me, Yusuk, I'm aware that Dong Hyun has houses scattered all over the country. Tell me where the ones he keeps his victims are located. I know you're the engineer who helped in building and designing them." Yusuk scoffed, "You're both going to die." "Wrong answer." Minhu replied and shot his leg with a silencer. Yusuk cried out in pain, but Minhu covered his mouth. His muffled sounds were barely heard by his men outside. Minhu tied his mouth again and warned, "Listen to me, you can call out for your men and they'll come in, but before they get to me, I'll make sure you're dead. This is your last chance. The next bullet is going to your head. Tell me where the houses are located." Minhu freed his mouth as Yusuk, who was bleeding, began to nod his head. "All right, I'll tell you what you want to hear," Yusuk replied, and began to list the different locations. Minhu shook his head, smiling. "This is interesting. Are you trying to tell me that you do not value your life?" Minhu asked. "I'm telling you the truth," Yusuk replied. "Oh, but you're lying, because you see, I already know most of these houses." "Nevertheless, I decided to give you a chance," Minhu said. He walked over to the table, picked up Yusuk's tablet, and took off his blindfold, showing it to him. The man stared at him in surprise. "How did you get that?" "Give it to me," Yusuk demanded. "No can do," Minhu replied. He took out a cord from his bag, connected a wire from the tablet to his phone, and began copying all the data inside. Yusuk wanted to scream for help at this point. He was bleeding and in a lot of pain, but he was afraid since Minhu had warned him that any sound from him would result in a gunshot to the head. Just as Minhu finished copying the data, Chantel walked over to him still naked. He quickly covered Yusuk's eyes and mouth again and asked her, "Why haven't you put on your clothes?" "Go on," Chantel put them on. "Why are you being stubborn?" However, Chantel ignored his words and hugged him. He sighed, carried her, bridal style, and laid her on the bed. "Hold on, I'll be right back, sweetie," he said. He put both the tablet and his phone into his bag, zipped it, and hung it. He bent down and said to the man, "I'm going to give you one last chance. Will you tell me what I want to know?" Unknown to Minhu, Chantel got up from the bed, picked up the gun that was lying on the ground, and fired a few shots. Unlike Minhu's gun, which was a silencer, this gun made loud sounds as she shot 3 times into the ceiling. "Shit!" Minhu cursed and ran over to where Chantel was, took the gun from her, and quickly covered her body with the bedsheet once again. He moved backward toward the balcony, but before they could get out, the door was kicked open, and more than 20 men rushed in, and all pointed their guns at Minhu and Chantel. The men stared at Yusuk in surprise, and one asked, "Boss, what happened to you?" Minhu was pointing his gun at Yusuk, who was still on the floor. "If any one of you takes a step, Yusuk is going to die here," Minhu warned. Yusuk stared at Minhu and smiled, saying, "Give it up, loser. You and your bitch are done for." Minhu slowly let go of Chantel as his left hand moved into his pocket, and he took out a button. The men were all still pointing their guns at him, afraid that once they took a shot at him, he would kill their boss. They began to approach Minhu and Chantel slowly. However, at this time, Chantel made things more difficult for Minhu when she bolted out of his arms and went on her knees. The bedsheet that covered her body fell off at this point, and Minhu gasped in shock. As Chantel sank to her knees, releasing her grip on the bedsheets, Minhu pressed the button in his hand. The explosives he had strategically placed around the room detonated, engulfing the men standing a few meters away, including Yusuk, in a consuming blaze. Minhu swiftly pulled Chantel towards the door, securing it behind them. Realizing she was unclothed, he extended his hand to retrieve the bedsheet, but it had caught fire. Using his feet, he managed to extinguish the flames, then hastily wrapped the sheets around Chantel's form. Aware that not all of the men had perished in the inferno, Minhu heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Struggling, he managed to secure the balcony door, fastening it to the railing before carefully guiding Chantel as they descended. Minutes later, Minhu unlocked his car parked precisely for their escape. Gently ushering Chantel into the back seat, he quickly settled into the driver's position, ensuring all doors were locked before speeding away. Several pursuing men aimed at his fleeing car, but their bullets couldn't reach him. Meanwhile, Yusuk, though scorched by the fire, clung to life. One of the men urgently called for reinforcements, while others within the club rushed to the scene. "Ensure their capture, dead or alive," Yusuk commanded, spurring his men into action. With determined steps, they set off in pursuit of Minhu and Chantel. Minhu realized that leading them to his friend's house would jeopardize both of their safety, so he directed his car straight to the airport. He dialed his pilots, confirming their readiness, as he sped towards the terminal. Glancing at Chantel, who was now anxiously trying to get free, Minhu remained focused. He ignored her undressed state, knowing the car doors were locked, preventing any escape. As Minhu raced to the airport, the men behind struggled to close the gap. Once at the terminal, he hurriedly disembarked, carefully draping the bedsheets over Chantel before assisting her onto the waiting plane. With a swift takeoff, the aircraft soared into the sky. Yet Chantel's agitation persisted throughout the flight. Minhu had no choice but to lead her to the restroom. Once there, he pinned her to the wall and asked, "What will it take to get you back to sanity, darling?" Chantel smiled, took off the sheets covering her body, went on her knees, and unzipped his pants. Knowing what she wanted, Minhu closed his eyes and stroked her hair, moaning as she sucked his dick. Eventually, he pushed her back to the wall and lifted her up. She wrapped her arms around his neck as her thighs rested on his arms, and his palms firmly held her butt cheeks. She gasped when he entered her pussy and began to fuck her. His breathing became ragged as his thrusts became violent. Chantel opened her eyes wide as she felt him deeply hitting her sweet spot. He held her more firmly while she shook as she found her release. When the passion was spent, Minhu led Chantel out of the restroom and back to their seats. However, a few minutes later, she became horny again and began to seduce him. They kept going in and out of the restrooms, having sex, until Minhu was completely exhausted. When Chantel tried to seduce him again, he begged, "Please have mercy on me." Seeing that she wasn't listening to him, Minhu locked her in his arms, refusing to let her go until she finally fell asleep. When his flight landed, he carried her into his bathroom and helped her wash up before taking her back to the room. As he lay her on the bed, he stared at her with a smile on his face. "You are quite stubborn, darling, but I love you nonetheless. I will always cherish you. Good night." He kissed her lips before leaving the room to go through the information he had retrieved from Yusuk. When Chantel opened her eyes in the morning, her head was throbbing, her body was sore, and every part of her ached. Struggling to sit up, she found herself in a large room with a king-sized bed. She tried to recall how she had ended up there, realizing she was in unfamiliar clothes on the bed, but couldn't remember anything clearly. With determination, she managed to lift herself up, but her feet wobbled as she stood. "What happened to me?" she wondered aloud. She sat back on the bed, placing her hand on her dizzy head, deciding to worry about the situation later. As she attempted to rest, flashes of the previous day's events began flooding her mind. She remembered endangering her and Minhu's lives, exposing herself in front of men, and even firing a gun at the ceiling. Chantel let out a scream, catching Minhu's attention in the kitchen where he was making breakfast. He rushed to the room, concerned. What happened, Chantel? Are you okay? Minhu asked anxiously. Trying to control her breathing, Chantel replied. It was a terrible nightmare, Minhu. I was in a room, confronted a man named Yusuk, and then I took off my clothes in front of many men. Relax, Minhu comforted her, taking a seat beside the bed. But why do I feel so sore? Chantel inquired, puzzled. Are you sure you don't remember everything? Minhu questioned gently. Well, some parts are hazy, but I have flashes of the memory. Tell me it was just a dream. Minhu, please tell me it was a dream, Chantel pleaded, clutching his shirt. Take a deep breath, Minhu advised. Looking at herself, Chantel realized she was wearing one of Minhu's shirts. As she tried to piece things together, another memory resurfaced, Minhu covering her with the sheets and warning her to stay put. Oh no, Minhu, did I do something crazy? Chantel worriedly asked, her gaze fixed on him, hoping for reassurance. Minhu let out a sigh, saying, It's all a result of your stubbornness, Chantel. You never listened to me, and you always pay the price. Why are you like this? I don't know, Chantel replied. I don't know, Minhu. I'm sorry, I don't know. I think the loss of my parents has really affected me. I tend to react foolishly sometimes. You can say that again, Minhu concurred. Tell me, Minhu, what happened? Was it a dream? Minhu shook his head. No, it wasn't a dream. Chantel covered her face, feeling extremely embarrassed. It wasn't your fault, Minhu said. He began to narrate everything that happened from the beginning to the end. How were you able to pull all of that off? She asked. Well, I planned ahead, Minhu replied. You planned ahead? Chantel was surprised. Yeah. After you came up with the plan, I began to ask myself, what could possibly go wrong? I mean, knowing Chantel, she would do whatever it takes to get the information from Yusuk. But then it occurred to me that Yusuk might have her take something. I mean, what if they both got high? I was initially thinking you would both get high. I didn't think you would be the only victim. I had to prepare myself for any eventuality, so I came up with a plan. As Minhu explained everything he had planned, Chantel sighed. I guess you know me so well that you even know I would not listen to you. Yeah, I know that Chantel Park is stubborn, but I know that it's only a matter of time before she changes. It's still all right, Chantel. It wasn't your fault. Yes, if you had listened to me and not taken that drink, we could have come up with another plan. He probably would have gotten another companion for the night. I would have gone into his room and waited for him, and when they eventually came, I would have knocked his companion unconscious, gotten the information from him, and knocked him unconscious before leaving. It would have been easy peasy. But then you interfering made it worse. However, we were able to walk away with our lives. Minhu replied, What about the information we needed? Did you get them? Chantel asked. Yes, Minhu said, picked up the man's tablet and added, Here, I couldn't really access his tablet because almost all his folders are locked, but I managed to copy some information to my phone. Here are all the different houses of the wolves, but some are different. These are the ones in which they carry out their operations. There are 5 of them. I can't tell which one exactly houses your parents, but if we go through them one by one, we can definitely find them. Thank you, Chantel replied. I don't know what I would have done without you. Do you want me to tell you? Minhu asked. Yes, tell me, Chantel said. Minhu smiled. Well, you would have suffered miserably and probably ended up dead. I guess you're right, Chantel admitted. I have to give you credit though, Minhu. You're an amazing man. I've always known that, Minhu beamed. Thank you. Now back to business. Minhu started to leave the room, but Chantel grabbed his hand and pulled him back. As he sat on the bed, he asked, What now? Do you have something else to ask or complain about? Chantel shook her head. No, I can't complain, Minhu. Thank you. If it weren't for you, I probably would have lost my life, as you said. She rested her head on his chest and hugged him. Minhu smiled and stroked her hair. You must be very hungry and exhausted. Let me get breakfast ready for you. Chantel nodded. Why don't you go into the bathroom and freshen up? I managed to get some clothes for you when I went out to the store this morning. They're in the living room, so I'll bring them over. While you're freshening up, I'll get breakfast ready and leave the clothes for you to change into. All right, I'll do just that, Chantel replied. After Minhu left, Chantel sighed, feeling fortunate to have met him. She went into the bathroom to take a shower while Minhu fetched the clothes and prepared breakfast. He left the few clothes he had bought for her on the bed and waited outside. When she emerged from the bathroom, Chantel got dressed and joined him for breakfast. Once they finished eating, Minhu suggested, "Why don't you get some rest? I'll be right back." Chantel noticed his bag and a few tools on the couch at this point. "You're going out?" she asked him. "Yes, I need to do a little scouting," he replied. "Now that we are here, the earlier I start looking at the wolves' houses, the better." "You're going to one of the wolves' houses. Let me come with you, Minhu," Chantel requested. No, Minhu said. "Chantel, you're not coming with me. You still look very weak. You're not feeling okay, all right? I called my friend who is a doctor, and he prescribed some medicine for you. I'm going to get them on my way back, but until then, you're not going anywhere." "Come on," Chantel said. "Minhu, you know we work better together. We are partners. Let me look out for you, all right?" "No, Chantel, I cannot say this enough. You are not strong enough, rest." Chantel frowned as she insisted she wanted to go with Minhu, but he wouldn't let her. She began to make a face. Minhu got up, picked up his bag, and walked to the door. When he turned and saw that Chantel was unhappy, he said, "All right, let's do it tomorrow then. Once you're okay, we'll go together." "All right," Chantel said, feeling happy. Eventually, Minhu went out to get the medicine for her, and after she took it, she spent the rest of the day sleeping. The next day, they both got dressed and left the house as early as they could, making their way to one of the wolves' houses out of the 5 Minhu had pointed out. When they got to the first one, they parked their car some distance away from the building and went toward the back of the house. After going all around, he saw that the house had a high fence and was gated. There was no way they could see what was inside without getting in. However, if he was on a tall building, he'd be able to point out 1 or 2 things. Since he had binoculars, he told Chantel that it was better for them to get to a vantage point. That way they could clearly see what was happening inside. "It's a good idea," Chantel replied. "Let's go." The moment they turned to leave, they began to hear sirens. "Are those police officers? What are they doing here?" Chantel asked. Minhu said, "Hold on, Chantel." He turned toward the front and saw more than 4 police vehicles and officers coming out of the cars with their guns. The men began walking in their direction, and at this point, Minhu realized that someone had seen them and informed the officers. "Come on, Chantel, we need to go," he said to her. They both began to run the other way while the officers chased after them. As they got into their cars and drove after them, Minhu knew that they would not be able to make it on a paved road. So he told Chantel, and they took a smaller track where the cars would not be able to make it. Most of the officers came out of the vehicles and began to chase after them while both Chantel and Minhu ran for their lives. Chantel and Minhu kept running until they finally got to the train station. Once there, Minhu quickly purchased tickets for both of them, and they boarded the train. By the time the officers arrived, the train had already departed. "What happened back there?" Chantel asked him. "Well, obviously the wolves realized we were nearby," Minhu replied. "They must have alerted the police and asked them to pursue us. This is likely why Donghyun bribed the police. He is done relying solely on his own men and is now involving the police. If they chase us, we'll appear as genuine criminals to others. But we can't continue like this, being pursued by both the police and criminals. How do you think we can manage, Minhu?" Chantel inquired. "I have a plan," Minhu responded. "Henceforth, we'll go about wearing disguises. But once we get back home, I need to prepare and go back to see that building," Minhu explained. "Why?" Chantel asked. "Because I made a call earlier in the day. I know someone who can help us get in there tomorrow." It's important for me to see the building from the outside. Chantel, if I'm alone, it's difficult to tell that it's me. But if we're together, it's easy to raise suspicions. You have to listen to me this time and wait behind. I'll scout the building from a vantage point. I just need to see it with my binoculars. It won't even take up to 30 minutes. I'll be back, I promise. You need to listen to me, Chantel. You promised, don't forget. Yes, of course, I'll listen to you, Chantel replied. Just be safe, Minhu. Thank for understanding, he replied. They left the next train station when they felt the danger had passed. Minhu knew he needed to retrieve his car. However, his mission was more important than the car. He called an ally and asked for help to drive the car out from there. He met up with him, gave him his car keys, and said, "Once you drive it home, let it be with you for a while, and I'll pick it up when it's time." Afterward, Minhu went to a high-rise building. From the roof, he was able to scout the building of the wolves. He noticed from where he was how many men patrolled the outside of the building and how many layers were there, and he was able to figure out which was the most important part of the building. After getting all the information he needed, Minhu went back home. "Are we set for tomorrow?" Chantel asked. "Yes," Minhu replied. "Everything has been put in order. Even my car has been driven away." "I've been meaning to ask you," Chantel said. "Your account is frozen, and I haven't been able to get access to my money. So how are you able to keep spending so much?" "Well, my friend in Busan, the one we stayed with, who is a doctor, gave me a lot of cash. It was stacked in the plane. I saved it there for a rainy day. Even the pilots didn't know of its existence." "He gave you that much money?" Chantel asked. "Yes, he has everything today, thanks to me. Just the way my best friend helped me back then, I helped him too. When I was in school, he was a medical student, but at the time I had already begun working and making so much money. Then he couldn't afford his tuition and wanted to pull out. I love people who are focused and driven. Seeing how much he was struggling to make it, I was an engineering student and he was a medical student. I offered to help him at no cost. The truth was that since I was planning my revenge, I knew I needed a doctor by my side, and he seemed really good at what he was doing. So I helped him to graduate. I gave him money to set up his hospital in Busan. That was his first branch before he extended it to many other branches. So you see, he's someone who can never turn his back on me. He knows that even if he gives me some money today, I can always give him more when the time comes in the future." "Oh, well, you should have told me all this from the start," Chantel replied. "That way I would have stopped looking over my shoulder where he was concerned." Minhu laughed. "Come on, Chantel. I'll never take you to where I know your life would be put in danger. I reached out to Young because I knew he was trustworthy, and I also knew he would go through the hoops for me." "So, what's the plan?" Chantel asked. "Well, it's all thanks to Young's connections. They need an electrical engineer at the Wolves' house tomorrow. Fortunately for us, I am an electrical engineer." Minhu replied. "But won't they know once we get there?" Chantel asked. "I'll take care of that," Minhu replied. "I have paid for our disguises, and they should be arriving anytime soon. Once they do, trust me, no one would recognize us. Also, the owner of the electrical company is an ally. All I need to do is intercept his men, knock them out, and keep them somewhere, then we can go in their place. He has already given his consent to this, so it's going to be easy peasy." Chantel completed his words for him. Minhu smiled and nodded. "But risky all the same. Remember, Chantel, I have no backup plans today. You have to listen to every single word I say." "Yes, yes, Captain," Chantel replied. The next morning, Minhu and Chantel appeared in front of the wolves' safe house, donning the uniforms of the men from the electrical company, wearing red-colored coveralls. Minhu wore a beard to disguise his appearance, while Chantel also wore masks that Minhu had ordered on different parts of her face, giving her a completely different look. After presenting their fake IDs at the entrance, they were escorted into the house by the underlings who were stationed there. All of them were wearing the same uniform, adorned with drawings of wolves on the front. As Chantel looked around the house, she noticed that there weren't too many men guarding it. She began to doubt if this was indeed where her parents were being held, but she didn't want to jump to conclusions. She had to see for herself. Once they reached the section with faulty wiring, Minhu got to work. He placed a sturdy stool under his feet and stood on it, while Chantel remained on the ground beside him, handing him his tools whenever he asked for them. There were about 6 men in the part of the building where Minhu and Chantel were. As he glanced around, Minhu spotted a large white door at the end of a hallway. He knew that door would definitely lead to the most important part of the house. A guard kept moving back and forth in the hallway. Despite the observation, Minhu turned his attention back to his task. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Chantel asked, noticing some of the wires beginning to spark. "I've told you this is my specialty," Minhu replied. They both wore Bluetooth earpieces, allowing them to hear what the other person was saying. "I need to get in through the white door," Chantel said. "Calm down," Minhu replied. "When the right time comes, you will. For now, focus on helping me." Chantel focused her attention on helping Minhu. As she stared at the man who was moving up and down the hallway, she noticed that he had a mask on his face, and only his eyes were exposed. "This is going to be in my favor," she said as she stared at the man. The moment Minhu looked at the man, he understood what Chantel meant. "When the right time comes, I'll tell you," Minhu said. He kept working on the wires as his eyes darted around the place. Eventually, when he saw the man walking towards the restroom, he said to Chantel, "Go on now, this is your chance. Be very careful, we have just 20 minutes. Don't forget." As Chantel began to walk away, Minhu added, "Most importantly, make use of your spray." She walked over to the man, as though she was also heading to the restroom, and he stopped, asking, "Yes, what do you want?" "I'm really very pressed," Chantel replied. "Can you help me?" "Where's the restroom, please?" "It's just by your right." "Haven't you seen it?" the man asked. Chantel pretended to look and said, "Oh, my bad. I'm so sorry." She walked over to the door, held the handle, and pushed it open. She unhooked the button of her coverall, showing her undershirt, and turned to face the man. She smiled and licked her lips. Curving her index finger in invitation, she whispered, "I'm so bored. Won't you like to have some fun?" The man looked around and noticed that no one was paying attention to him. He smiled and walked over. "Why not? A few minutes wouldn't hurt." Chantel smiled and opened the door wide for him. As he went in, she pulled him inside and locked the door. The man quickly held her by her shoulder and pinned her against the wall. However, her hand dipped into her pocket. She took out a spray and sprayed it on his face. The man opened his mouth to scream, but no words came out. He felt consumed by pain as he fell to his knees and lost consciousness. "That was easy," Chantel said, smiling. "Hey Minhu, this man is going to be sleeping for 5 hours, so what should I do?" "There's no time to play," Minhu replied. "Come on, get to work, Chantel." "All right, boss," she said. Chantel began to take off the clothes of the man who was unconscious. When she took off his shirt, the smell hit her nose and she exclaimed, "You, gross." She kicked the man who was on the ground and added, "Couldn't you at least have washed your shirt? You're such a pig." With no other choice, she took off her outer clothes, put on his shirt and the male black pants she had brought in her bag, and removed the mask from the man's face. She knew that someone would eventually want to use the toilet, but it was meant for visitors and workers. There was a separate toilet for the underlings, so she felt that people might not notice him early. After making sure that she looked like the man, she stepped into his shoes and wore them. They were much bigger than hers, as the man was taller. However, she had no choice but to put her own shoes into her bag and leave the bag behind. She took out all the weapons she needed, tucked them into her pockets, and left the room. When she came out, though, she turned the tag which showed that there was someone inside the toilet and placed it by the door before walking out. After coming out of the toilet, she began making her way over to the white door. Minhu warned, "Please be careful, Chantel. You cannot act on your own, all right?" "Relax," Chantel replied. "I'm following your orders, Minhu." She held the door, opened it, and went inside. The moment she got inside the room, she came face to face with Dong-hyun. Her heart skipped a beat as she tried her best not to show her nervousness. She counted them all. There were about 20 men. Why are there so many? She thought. Her eyes went to a little girl lying beside Dong-hyun's feet, and she realized that he had just killed the girl. She stopped herself from gasping, looked around the room, and noticed different small beds. On them laid different little girls who were seemingly unconscious, about 12 of them. She turned her back on Dong-hyun when she saw him looking at her. Then she heard his voice say, "You stop right there." Thank you for watching. Kindly subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so as to get notified when we drop new stories. Like and share to family and friends, and finally tell us where you're watching from in the comment section, and we will see you in our next video.